Good morning to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Monday, October the 16th, 2017. Well, let's take a look. This is what Ophelia looked like last night, yesterday afternoon into last night. And you can see it still had a little bit of convective activity concentrated near the center as it was just beginning to lose its tropical characteristics, and doing so rapidly from this point on, I might add. Transitioning into a much larger system incorporated into this front and energy in the atmosphere instead of deriving it from the ocean and the latent heat that resides within the atmosphere just above the ocean, the warm subtropical Atlantic. That's yesterday afternoon, and this is what we have with post-tropical Ophelia now transitioned into this huge ocean storm with the center of circulation very close, if not over at the coast of Ireland. Let's zoom in here, and you can just see a little bit of convection left with it, a lot over here on the northwest side, and then much larger cloud shield with heavy rain way over on the west side. But you can bet right here some strong onshore flow bringing southeast winds. In some cases, 60, 70, 80 miles per hour wouldn't be shocking, and trees down, power outages, perhaps over 100,000 people plus without power, and then you can see the frontal boundary here extending across the rest of the United Kingdom down through parts of France, and then even farther to the south and east and west, and just away from the center here. Trying to get my bearings. Not often do I talk about Europe, across Spain and Portugal. So that's a very large weather system as a whole. And this is advecting or moving laterally a lot of warm air into the United Kingdom. My brother lives in London. He was saying how warm and humid it is. And we have a woman over here in Ireland. Her name is Tina, and she was telling me on Facebook that it's a pleasant day, if not for the strong wind. Very humid, very warm, and very nice, except for the fact that you've got this large disruptive storm. Unconfirmed report of one fatality of a tree falling on a car. Hopefully that ends up not being true, but if it is, it just shows you that, look, these big storms, they do have an impact. It's very interesting to see. It's amazing to see on satellite. It's a rare occurrence, but they do come with consequences, unfortunately. So this will move on out over the next 24 hours or so, generally off in this direction, and the low pressure area will fill, and the winds will die down, and Ophelia and the post-tropical version of it will be just a memory at that point. But a very rare satellite picture indeed, as what was once Category 3 Hurricane Ophelia now making landfall, if you want to call it that, across portions of Ireland. Midday for them, early in the morning here in the United States, where I'm recording today's update. So we also have in the Atlantic, let me go to the National Hurricane Center homepage, forgot to bring that up. So Ophelia is off the map up here, and it's no longer being tracked by the National Hurricane Center in any case, so it wouldn't matter, but it exited the map stage right, an extreme right corner, if you will. So now we watch over here, we have Invest Area 92L, just north of the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, and you can see what it looks like on this satellite vantage point, and we'll look at it from a slightly different one here. Let's go to the Western Atlantic unenhanced infrared loop. So this is sort of your black and white version of the infrared. So the brighter tops are going to represent higher clouds in the atmosphere, the brighter whites do. And you can see, yes, there's a large mass of clouds here, but no, it is not consolidating into anything that resembles a tropical storm. And we've seen plenty of those this year to know what that should look like. I do want to point out some squally weather coming in here to portions of the Leeward Islands and areas like Dominica. Nope, you don't want anything like that. Maybe the fresh water is beneficial if you can capture it in any cisterns, etc. But beyond that, any inclement weather down here just hampers the recovery efforts in the areas that were ravaged by Irma, Jose, and Maria. Jose doesn't get talked about that much, but it came in adding some big-time insult to injury just after Irma. And then, of course, after that was Maria. and still parts of Puerto Rico, a large part, without power. What a massive undertaking that is down there. That should definitely be made into a very serious documentary by somebody like National Geographic, or Discovery Channel. But you got to get the right production company to handle it properly. Leave the politics out and the blaming, and look at the facts. Look at how daunting a task it is to recover in an area like Puerto Rico. It's an island, and that was obviously mentioned prominently by the American president, and it's true. And so it must be very, very difficult to deal with that. I can only imagine, and our sympathies, I know mine, are definitely with the people in Puerto Rico. What can you do? You can't evacuate 3 million people off of an island ahead of the hurricane. And then if you did, at the snap of a finger, how do you get them back? And then what do you do with the infrastructure? It's just rough, and we have to deal with it. But nevertheless, there it is. There's 92L. This is what it looks like in the model field. Let me back up. Things are just discombobulated this morning, but that's okay. Not always going to be perfect. This is what it looks like in the GFS from last night's run. And as you can see, that's just nothing. It's a series of blobs of energy, nothing consolidated around any kind of a common low pressure area or focused bundling of energy, if you will. There's Bermuda for what it's worth, and this is going out to 5 days, and something else tries to develop near there at the end of that time period. But it's all very disorganized, really no big deal. Showers and thunderstorms, heavy rain maybe for Bermuda, and an increase in southerly winds. And then that front comes through and sweeps everything away, so that's good. In the western Pacific, I want to zoom in on this satellite shot, a series of typhoons probably going to be setting up across the area over the next several days. And we have one that moved through Vietnam recently that also brought a tremendous amount of misery and flooding. Very tragic. If you haven't read about that, Google search that. I don't remember the name of it. It has an interesting spelling I couldn't even try to pronounce. But the overall setup out here is like that grapevine that I talk about in the Atlantic, the intertropical convergence zone. But in this case, it's like a very long monsoon trough setup out here. The ITCZ is typically closer to the equator. But this is just a large area of lower pressure. The Madden-Julian oscillation, quite favorable in this area of supporting upward motion and light winds in the upper part of the atmosphere so that thunderstorms can blossom and go vertical and then spread out evenly instead of all in one direction. When you have wind shear, that's really not going to be prevalent across this region. It's going to be favorable. So we're going to have some typhoon development, and these typhoons, now that we're into October, a lot of them will turn and then head up into the jet stream and have some interesting implications down the road when you take all of that massive amount of heat energy out of the tropics and you transfer it into the westerlies of the mid-latitudes up here. You get some very interesting interactions downstream. But what is interesting, too, is once this phase of the, what we call the wet phase, if you will, there's a lot of ways to look at it, of the Madden-Julian oscillation, the MJO, once it leaves this area and sort of heads eastward over time, propagates eastward, and that's picked up here on the climate forecast system. All this green and white indicates extreme upward motion, a very high amplitude version of the Madden-Julian oscillation, sinking motion over here in the western parts of the Atlantic Basin, in fact, all of the western hemisphere. But as we get out towards days 10 and 15, there's an indication that the green, not quite as amplified, moves over to the eastern Pacific and then eventually the southwest Atlantic Basin, and specifically the western Caribbean, and that holds on through about day 20 or so. Now, of course, we're into early November. So the bottom line, maybe, just maybe, between days 10 and 20, and I know you think, well, that's so far out in time, you can't possibly predict anything. Well, that's exactly right. We can't possibly predict anything specific, but these are the signals that we look at. And once this is in place, assuming that it is, then you look to see if something reacts to it. And so I look at this as saying, all right, we have the technology and the available tools now to see that a window of opportunity might be coming and at least we can start looking out for it. But it's interesting because even if we saw Maria exactly on track 10 days out, remember the Hurricane Center forecast was 4 days, where they were showing it moving right over Puerto Rico, and that didn't waver at all. What if it was 10? What if it was 20? Would it have made any difference? The infrastructure still would have been wiped out. Maybe more people could have evacuated ahead of time. I don't know. The bottom line is, it is an amazing time that we live in, where we can see into the future using numerical weather prediction, and there's this possibility, at least, especially considering the time of year, the geographically favored location of the Western Caribbean, and now the change from favorable in the Westpac to unfavorable in the Atlantic Basin to more sinking motion in this would be the Indian Ocean, but with a rising motion setting up in the Western Caribbean and Western Atlantic Basin as a whole in about 10 days to 2 weeks or so. So it's not over yet. That's the bottom line. All right, so you folks in Ireland and Scotland today, use common sense. Don't do anything foolish if you're trying to get pictures or video of this interesting event known as post-tropical Ophelia, or whatever you want to call it. We want you back to be able to see future hurricane outlook and discussion videos, and you can't do so if you do something that's not using common sense while trying to document this rare and highly unusual event. Just be careful out there. So it'll move on through by tonight and tomorrow. It'll be, unless you lose power, I was going to say it'll be a distant memory. But if your power goes out, it's probably going to seem like an eternity. You know how that is. All right, that is it from me for today. We'll keep an eye on what's happening with ex-tropical Ophelia or whatever it is over there, and we'll follow things on social media, and we'll wish our friends in the British Isles the best of luck as you endure Ophelia. Have a great rest of your Monday. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com, of course. Thank you for watching, and I'll have more for you tomorrow.